The streets of Tbilisi turned into a battleground on Friday as thousands of protesters clashed with riot police, exposing Georgia's deepening estrangement from the European Union. Masked demonstrators hurled fireworks and insults, chanting Russians and slaves, while riot police retaliated with water cannons and tear gas. By the night's end, 3 officers were injured, and the Georgian capital's simmering tensions had erupted into chaos. The unrest was ignited by the ruling Georgian Dream Party's abrupt decision to freeze all talks on EU accession until 2028, coupled with a rejection of EU budgetary grants. The government accused Brussels of leveraging membership aspirations to sow division and unrest in Georgia. The announcement enraged the pro-EU opposition, further isolating the South Caucasus nation, where 80% of the population supports EU membership, an aspiration enshrined in the constitution, but now in jeopardy. "This is not peace, this is war," declared President Salome Zurabichvili, a vocal pro-EU critic of Georgian Dream, as she stood amid the chaos. She accused the government of betraying Georgia's history and aspirations for European integration.
Today, this non-existent and illegitimate government declared not peace, but war on its own people, its own past, and its own future. This war is on our future, the future of our society, and the future of our country. Because on this path, there is no Georgian statehood, no independence, and no future except in Russia.
Georgia's relationship with the EU has been deteriorating for months. While the bloc granted candidate status in December 2023, it has since frozen progress over concerns about what it views as authoritarian policies, mirroring Moscow's influence. These policies include controversial measures against NGOs labeled foreign agents and LGBTQ+ rights, which the EU cites as evidence of Georgia's democratic backsliding. Georgian Dream, however, dismisses such claims as unfounded.
Our responsibility to our ancestors and history is to make Georgia a full member of the European family. Accordingly, our state task is to make Georgia a member of the European Union by 2030, and we will make every effort to achieve this. It should be emphasized that relations between Georgia and the EU are bilateral, and they should not only be bilateral. We are a proud and self-respecting nation with a great history, so it is categorically unacceptable for us to consider EU integration as a favor. Moreover, we believe that Georgia, a country with a rich culture and potential, can enrich the EU, and the EU can enrich Georgia.
The ruling party insists that Georgia's historical and cultural significance should earn it EU membership on its terms, rejecting what it calls political blackmail from Brussels.
Against the background of the outbreak of war in Ukraine, when Georgia most needed peace, some European politicians and bureaucrats used the issue of candidate status as an attempt to organize a revolution in the country. Organizations receiving funding from the European Union were openly involved in this attempt of a revolution. For almost 2 years, the issue of candidate status has been used in Georgia as a tool of radicalism and polarization of society. Now we see that these people have replaced candidate status with the opening of negotiations.
The Georgian Prime Minister emphasized that the EU's manipulation of the candidate status issue was not just a political tactic, but a deliberate attempt to destabilize the nation.
Today, the opening of negotiations is being used as a tool to blackmail our country and divide society, just as the candidate status was used before. This is also a completely artificial event, especially since the date of accession is completely independent of the date of the opening of negotiations. What matters is not when we start negotiations, but when we finish them. Technically, it takes a year and a half or 2 years from the start of negotiations to the date of accession, and there are no plans to enlarge the EU eastwards until 2030.
Thousands of demonstrators took to the streets following the government's announcement, waving EU flags and demanding the resignation of Georgian Dream leaders. Similar protests were reported in provincial cities, signaling nationwide discontent. Adding to the turmoil, Georgian Dream has nominated a hardline anti-Western candidate to replace President Zurabichvili when her term ends in December. Opposition parties, already boycotting parliament over alleged election fraud, see this as further evidence of the government's pivot toward authoritarianism. Amid the unrest, Russian President Vladimir Putin praised Georgia's defiance, calling the government's stance courageous, despite the absence of formal ties between the two nations.
Honestly, when they began, I was watching in surprise. I was genuinely surprised. We do not have any relations with the current leadership of Georgia, none at all. But I was amazed at their courage and the character they demonstrated in defending their stance. I won't even evaluate that stance now. Similar processes are unfolding in other countries.
Despite severing diplomatic ties with Moscow after the 2008 war, Georgian Dream's overtures toward Russia have raised concerns among critics, who argue that this shift threatens Georgia's sovereignty and European aspirations.